Now, the last refundable credit that we want to talk about is going to be the child and dependent care credit. There are 4 basic requirements in order to claim the child and dependent care credit. You always have to have a qualifying person, you have to have earned income, you have to have work-related expenses, and then you have to put in certain provider information. Who can be a qualifying person? Well, it has to be your dependent who's age 12 or under. It can be a spouse who's unable to work because they're physically or mentally unable to care for themselves, or it can be a dependent that is older than 12 that is physically or mentally unable to care for themselves. These are just the basic rules of the child and dependent care credit. You also have to have earned income. This means that the credit itself is designed to help people go to work. And so you have to have income from, earned income. So in order to claim the credit, if you don't have earned income, but you're a full-time student, they will attribute you certain amounts of a small amount of income in order to, get a very small amount of credit. Expenses always have to be for work-related purposes. So you have to use these expenses have to be incurred so that a taxpayer, can, or their spouse on a joint return can work or look for work. And they can't be school-related expenses. You can't put a child in kindergarten, for example, and pay tuition or some sort of grade school and pay tuition and consider that to be childcare expenses. After school care absolutely would work, but it can't be those types of things. And this hasn't really changed. None of these rules have been in existence for a fair amount of time. This is how it's always worked. And the last thing is in order to claim the child dependent care credit, you have to provide certain information about the provider. The care can be in your home, it can be outside of your home, but you have to provide certain information. The only kind of limitations on who provides that care is it can't be provided by a child, your own child who is under age 18. It can be provided by a relative. It's very common. You pay your mother to care for your child, your sister. It just can't be your own child. But what's changed here with the child and dependent care credit? Well, prior to the American Rescue Plan of 2021, this was a non-refundable credit, and the amount of the credit could not exceed $3,000 if it was the amount of expenses that you would pay were $3,000 for one child or $6,000 if there was more than one child. So basically, you could pay $3,000 to your daycare if it was one child, and that would be the maximum that would be eligible for the credit. The amount of credit itself was 35% of what you paid. So the maximum credit that you could get for one child would be $1,000, $1,050. For 2 or more, it would be $2,100. That would be the absolute maximum. But the reality was there's an income phase out, which is once your income reached $15,000, then the amount of the credit was reduced until it was reduced for each $2,000 of income until it got down to 20%. And a lot of tax returns, a large number of tax returns, it really get down to that 20% number. It's very common. That's what we see. We see a 20% if you have one child of $3,000 in expenses. So you received a credit of $600 for your child for the daycare. Well, the reality is there's very few daycares. $600, nobody complains about getting a credit, but that's not going to cover a large part of the daycare cost for a child in today's world. Now, this year, this has been changed dramatically. And the first way it's been changed is that the expense amounts, last year it was $3,000 for one child. Now it's gone up to $8,000. So if you have one child, it's $8,000. If you have more than one child, it's $16,000. Much more, much larger amount. $8,000 is starting to be what a lot of folks are paying for in a year for daycare for one child in a lot of markets. A lot of markets, they pay more than that. Some they pay less, but it's a much larger number, $8,000 for a child. The next thing is that previously it was 35% of the expense was eligible for the credit. Now it's 50%. So you have one child, $8,000. So the maximum credit that you can receive is $4,000. Now the credit phase out happens at a much different dollar amount. Now the AGI can be up to $125,000 before it starts to be reduced. And then it will be reduced once your AGI is at $125,000. It will be reduced by 1%, for each $2,000 of income until it gets reduced down to 20%. And then it will stay at 20% until your AGI gets to $400,000. And then another phase out will start to occur until the credit is ultimately eliminated. All right, there's also a provision here for this that's going to affect taxpayers living abroad. Historically, as I said, taxpayers, when they live abroad, they can also claim this, but now in order to get this benefit, they must have lived at least half of the year in the United States for it to be a refundable credit. If they haven't lived here for more than half the year, then the credit will be non-refundable. However, the amounts will still be what it is for what the change is this year. So this means that if they live abroad, they will still be able to claim the credit. They still will be able to pay up to $8,000 for one child. The credit could still be 50% of that $8,000. It just will no longer be it will no longer be a refundable credit. It'll just simply be a non-refundable credit. And then we actually have a question on the 2441 that's going to make us indicate whether or not the child, whether or not the individuals have actually lived in the United States for more than 6 months of the year. The last thing that we want to talk about on the credits, on how this is going to affect our refundable credits, is dependent care benefits. Now, dependent care benefits actually impact the child and dependent care credit because we have to use any amount that we've paid in dependent care benefits, any amount that went through the dependent care plan, have to be used to reduce the expenses that are allowed for the child and dependent care credit. Now, historically, for the last many years, when you don't use your dependent care funds that are taken out of your paycheck, that taken out of people's paychecks by year end, those are forfeited. However, because of the coronavirus and because of folks having to go home and everything, the American Rescue Act modified dependent care funds, and they are allowing you to roll over these dependent care funds from year to year. So a child, from if anybody who had unused dependent care amount monies will be allowed to roll those monies over from 2020 to 2021. And if they don't use them in 2021, they'll continue to be allowed to roll them over until 2022. And they'll be able to use those for a child who maybe was 12 in 2020, is now 13, and next year will be 14. They can still use those. However, they won't be able to use these funds for younger children, for anyone else, because if it's new funds, the income limit remains 12. The age limit remains 12. There's another major modification on the dependent care benefits is that now people can, through their DCAP plans, instead of contributing $5,000, they can contribute up to $10,500 into their dependent care plans. So this is going to be reflected on your 2441. And so this is going to be something else that we're all going to see this year, when we go to complete this, is going to be, we're going to see these new amounts and these different amounts coming in from different years. So with this, we're going to wrap up the first part of this. And the next part, we'll go into other changes that have occurred in the 2021 tax changes.